I'm going to talk to you about lids today and throw a couple and just talk about considerations when making lidded pieces. And we're going to look at some of the common lids. These are some common lids for smallmouth jars. And this one sets inside, and this is a domed lid. This is thrown in this orientation, and this is thrown right side up with a knob on it. This has the knob added, and probably the simplest kind of knob to add is just a round ball that you pinch. And if you do pinch this, you need to make sure that this is indented and you can grip it, because if this comes to a point here, you can't pick it up, especially if you have butter on your hands. Okay, so we're gonna make this one first. And you'll notice that the bottom is faceted, and this is a nice way to clean up the bottom of the lid and not have to actually trim it, because you can do this with a fettling knife where you just take the knife and you cut facets around there. You use the fettling knife and you just go like this to facet the bottom. So when you throw this lid, you throw it off the hump right side up, and the knob is right on the lid. It's okay if the very bottom is not perfectly centered, just as long as the top is. And you start here and you make the knob. And then I use two fingers kind of coming in like a pair of scissors, and then I squeeze them together. So you can see how that's starting to make that shape. And then I just squeeze more with those fingers and come out and make the bottom of the lid. If I want to at this point, I can switch to this kind of grip, but usually I can get the whole thing done just like that. Now, this lid is proportionally, or the knob is proportionally too big for the lid, and I really can't make the lid much bigger than this because I ran out of clay. So, okay, so scale-wise, for this lid, I'd want to get rid of some of this knob. And I want to make sure that this part is what I call waspy or skinny, and this part flares out enough that you can hang on to it. Okay, so that's basically it. Very often I put a little spiral up here, which I think looks nice. And that's basically it for this lid, and then I need to cut it off. So when I cut this off, it helps if I have a defined line to cut. And I establish where that line is going to be totally by feel. So I put my thumb there, I'm looking here, I have a sense of where my thumb is, and I take the tip of this tool and I just score a slight indentation under there. And then it really helps if you have a wire that doesn't have any kinks in it, and you place the wire right in there. And what I do is I hold the left side of the wire stationary, and I get the elevation correct, and I rest my hand on the wheel head here so that the left side doesn't move, and then I pull the right side toward me and cut it off. Then I can pick this up and set it aside. Now later on, when I facet it, when it's rather hard, I'm gonna turn it upside down, and I'm gonna just facet that with a fettling knife. Now, you know, it's not easy to get the right thickness of the bottom, so just don't be surprised if it's either too thick or too thin. And why is having it the right thickness important? Well, if it's too thin, it's just not going to work, and if it's too thick, it won't dry very well. The bottom will be really wet, and it'll dry very unevenly, and that's a problem, which is going to look like this when it's done. I'll do another one now and just make it a little bigger. But these are typically fairly small lids. So here's the knob. This time I'm grabbing more clay, digging in underneath more, scissoring and pulling out, slightly up. Okay, I'm going to tweak it a little bit here. I'm going to work on the knob. I would say the knob, in proportion to the rest of it, is pretty good. It could maybe be a little bit lower. And now I need to make it a little more waspy. And what about the outside here? Right now this slopes continually up. For a piece that's this small, I can actually have it pretty darn flat. And what happens if it's not the right size when you take your calipers and you check it? Well, if it's not the right size, you're going to take your needle tool and you can make it smaller. If it's too small, you can make it bigger until you run out of clay. But if it's too big, okay, now it's a little smaller. And then I just need to clean up the edge. Okay, now when you make these kinds of lids, sometimes it looks good to have a little accent line here, or maybe two. And again, I'm going to feel underneath, take this tool and make a line and cut it off. So I bend over, get the wire in there, hold this nice and steady, and pull this toward me. Okay. And you can actually pick them up by the knob and set them somewhere to dry, and you can see the bottom there. That's what it looks like. Now we're going to look at this lid. This is a slightly domed lid. Again, it's for a small jar, like a sugar bowl or some such thing. And on either of these, you can cut out a little place for a spoon when it's leather hard. This is thrown this way as a shallow bowl. I can throw it off the hump, or I can throw it right on the wheel head. I'm going to throw this off the hump. Okay, so I'm going to bring this up and make a little bowl. Now, when I determine how much clay to use, I'm feeling here. I push down a little deeper with this finger to grab more clay, and I'm just making a shallow bowl, like so. Compressing the lip so it's strong. And it's about as big as I can make it with the amount of clay I grabbed in the first place. And this is deeper than I want. I want it to be pretty shallow. So I'm going to press it down and just make it a more gradual curve, like so. Okay, cut it off the same way, put my thumb here, and just kind of sense how thick I want the bottom to be. Score my line, put this on, cut it off. Then when this is leather hard, just like all pots, you turn it upside down on the wheel and you trim it and you make a dome. And that's pretty much it. Now, we're going to make another lid, which is the same basic shape as this, but we're going to make it bigger so that it can go in a casserole. It's the same procedure, a shallow, open shape. And let's take a look at the casseroles. Yep. So these are some considerations with casseroles. First of all, if you have a bowl-shaped casserole and you put food in it up to the normal fill line, its capacity is pretty darn small compared to a straight-sided or V-shaped casserole, where down there's a whole lot more room to put food. So think about that. One of the things I consider with my casseroles is picking them up with when they're hot. So if you have oven mitts on, can you get a good grip on them? And I like to make them such that you don't need to put handles on them. The lip sticks out sufficiently that you can get under it and securely hold it. And this has the same kind of lid as the little sugar bowls. It's a shallow dome. Here is another one. And as you increase the size of the casserole, the diameter of the lid dramatically increases, which makes it a lot more challenging to make. And this one has a very simple knob because it's a simple piece, and this one has a fancier strap handle. And here's the kind of an in-between size. And I have handles on these, but it's not absolutely necessary because of the shape. However, people like the look of a handle on a pot, so it's there more for decoration and some function. And if I do include a handle, I definitely want it to be functional. I don't want somebody to grab the handle and drop this thing on the floor because the handle was too small or too wimpy. And this piece really has some nice substantial handles that you can grab. But again, it doesn't really require it because you can also grab it under the lid. But one thing about this piece is because of the shape here, it holds a lot of food compared to this. However, the lid on this is smaller than this. So this lid on the smaller casserole is wider in diameter than the lid for this is going to be. So it's much easier to make a lid for this shape than it is for this. And when you get into the wider pieces, it's even more difficult. So I'm going to make a lid for this piece. And if I just kind of look on the bat, I can see it comes out to about there on the bat. Now, one of the things that you will discover is you need a lot more clay than you think you need. And this is probably the right amount of clay. I would guess that's over 2 pounds. I'm not going to cut it off and weigh it though. So here we go. Spin. Start with a fairly flat piece. It's going to come out to about there. Okay. I want to leave this part thick enough so that when I put a knob on it or put pressure on it, when I'm trimming and stuff, I don't go through the pot. So I'm going to come down and leave the bottom a reasonable thickness, and I can check it with my needle. And that is thicker than the handle of the needle tool, which is what I want. And then I'm going to come out. I'm just going to put my thumb here and come out. And bring this out into a shallow dome. And now I need to just make the whole thing wider, because it needs to come out to about here. So we'll see if we have enough clay. Okay, so that's about the right size. I'm compressing the lip. And one thing about this shape is that it needs to be, or I like them to be relatively flat. I don't want it to be real domed when I put it on the pot. And when you have an overhang over this here, this upper part tends to collapse. So you have to have this clay down here a lot further out than you think to support what's going on in here, which means ultimately that you have to start with more clay than you think you're going to need. Okay, so that one's done. I'll cut it off and trim it later. So how much clay was that? And this lid is, we can measure it. This lid is just shy of 8 inches. And Okay, 1 pound, 12 ounces. So if I use 2 pounds, I should be able to make a slightly larger lid. And this is how you figure out how much clay to use. You make a lid, and if it doesn't work, then you know that next time you need to use more or less clay. So that previous lid was just shy of 8 inches. And if anything, the bottom of the lid, the center, was a little thicker than I needed it to be. So I'm going to bring this out by pushing down and sliding out. Then I'm going to come down in the center and check it with a needle. Okay, that's pretty good. I'm going to go a little thinner and start pulling this thing out. And I want to leave this nice and wide down here. Okay. So this is probably under 8 at the moment. Yeah, 7.5. But it's thick enough here that I can make it a little wider. Okay, now it's about 8, and it should be a little over 8. And it's still pretty flat, and I would say that given the curve of this lip and the amount of clay I used, this is about the maximum diameter I would want to try to get out of 2 pounds of clay. So let's see what I've got. And it's like 8 1/4. So if I want a 10-inch lid, I might need to start with 3 pounds of clay. And you can see how wide that is down there, but that's necessary to support this up here. Where I see people have a lot of problems is right above there, they get a bump here, the ring of shame. You know, they get that hump and they just can't get it out where this sticks up here. Yeah. So you want to have the clay on the outside wide enough so that you don't run into problems right there. And if you try to make this too thin, you're just going to lose it. It's going to collapse on the outside edge. Okay. Here's a cross section. See how far out that is? So a couple of things about the bases on these pieces. In order to get a tight fit, from here on toward the inside, it should be slightly sloped down, and then this should be not quite vertical, but slightly out from vertical. And I like to look at this on my hand, where this is slightly outside of straight up and down, and this is slightly down, sloping here, and the lid sits right in here. Now, the way I get that is I use the corner of a rib. I use this corner of the rib to come in here and push out, and then I tip it to get the angle. This corner is too rounded. I use the sharper corner. You can just use your finger, but your finger's fat and round, kind of like this. And if you use your finger, you're gonna just get a round flange to sit the lid on, or as you guys call it, a gallery. And I prefer it to be in the other style, but this works so long as your lid is a good size. So this is the next kind of lid I want to show you, and it's a very common style of lid. It has a flange that sticks up. The pot has a little perch that the lid sits on. The perch sticks up. So all these have that little perch, and we're going to zoom in and you get a good look at that, where it swings up and so on. This allows the lid to rest on that perch so that the side of the lid right here is suspended above the pot, because if this hits the pot, then you've got a wax way out to here, and just like where the shadow is, you're going to have a big unglazed area. So every one of these sits on its little perch and has some clearance under there. Now, generally speaking, this kind of lid is small enough that you can grab it with one hand and you don't need a knob. But if you get into a larger piece like this, where you can no longer reach around it very effectively and pick up the lid, then you can put a knob on it. Again, the flange hangs down inside the pot, the lid sits on the perch. So I'm going to show you how to make this kind of lid. The lid is smaller than the bat, so when you're going to make a small lid like this, it makes sense to just make it right on the bat. For the smaller lids, like for a teapot, I typically use, I think I use 8 ounces, but maybe it's 12. I have it written down, and that's one thing you should do, is write down how much clay is required. So this is 12 ounces. I think it's more than I need, but we'll see. So if I want to make a lid this size, you can see where it is on the bat. Okay. So I start by making a shallow bowl. I try to get this an appropriate thickness so that if I want to add a knob or whatever, I've got enough thickness to do what I want down there. Now, from this shallow bowl, I take the outside edge and I fold it in. And I just continue to fold in and kind of press down right here. And that's going to be the flange. And then I use this like a pair of scissors to come under here and squeeze and bring that other part out. So there it is. Looking like that. Now, this kind of lid is hard to adjust the size on, and you will have made the base first and you'll have your calipers set, and you'll want this part right here to be exactly the right size, and the same size as your opening. So how do you get it the same size? Well, first of all, you want to start with the right amount of clay, and secondly, if you don't have it right, you can tweak it a little bit, but you don't have a whole lot of tweaking ability. So if it's a little too small, I can push it out a little bit, or if it's a little bit too wide, I can push it in a little bit, and I can sharpen this up here using the corner of this tool, like so. to give it a pretty clean, crisp transition between that and that. This should be slightly sloped in so that when you slide it in, it gets tighter as you go, and when it's all the way in, it should not wiggle. This part here can be horizontal or sloped up or sloped down. It doesn't matter. It depends on the pot and how you want it to look. So right now this is sloping up here, which means it's going to slope down on the pot. And now it's horizontal, and I'm going to push it a bit more, and now it's sloped slightly up. And generally speaking, just go with horizontal. It's a safe in-between kind of way to go. You can put a little throwing line in there if you want. I like the bottoms of these lids to be pretty flat, so the tops are pretty flat. I think they look like funny little hats if there's a dome. And then when I cut it off, in order to get it to dry uniformly, I want to get rid of as much excess clay as I can down there. So I just put my thumb here and I slide this tool in, and I go in and down until I hit the bat. And then I can cut the whole thing off and pick up the lid and leave this waste. One of the things that happens when I do that is it changes the curve here. So I'm going to push it down again. And I'm also going to check with my calipers to make sure that it remains the right size. And then I can cut it off. Now I don't normally pick it up at this moment. I let it sit for a while and stiffen up. But if I do pick it up, as you can see, I left all this waste on the wheel, and this is domed. After I trim it, it's going to be relatively flat, which is what I want. So these two lids are related. This one is relatively flat, and it can even be straight out. This one, the center part hangs down. So the big difference between this is that this one has a lower center of gravity, which makes it useful on a teapot, because when you tip the teapot, it can go pretty much to vertical before it falls out, because the center of gravity is sort of in the center of the lid. And if you try to put a lid that's this shape on a teapot, when you tip it, the center of gravity is way out beyond the flange that it sits on, and it's definitely going to fall out and break your mug. So these two lids sit lower in the pot. Practical. This has wax on it, so it's a little slippery, but it should go to vertical when you tip it. So I'm going to show you how to make this, which is very similar to how you make this. So a key factor with this lid is that when you put it in the pot, you don't want this part to hit and prevent it from going down. You need to have this flange swing out enough to clear the hole in the pot. So we're going to throw it off the hump like we were doing before. And when we begin, we put the knob right on there. And you need to grab enough clay here to scissor it out and pull it up. So I'm actually going to squish this whole thing down a bit more and try to get in there and get enough clay to scissor out and up. Okay, and now I start squeezing, bring this out, And we have some considerations as to what this knob is going to look like. I think I may have more clay than I want. I could make a knob that is this shape, or it could have a deeper V, or it could just kind of have a little ball, whatever. And that little ball's hollow. Anyway, I'm going to grab this and I'm going to come up, out, and over. And this is too fat here. So that definitely needs to come in. And maybe I'll make a little thing here where you can kind of grip that. Little finger holes. Anyway. Out, up, over. And that's pretty much it. But make sure that this is not too wide here, because that's the critical part. And if it is, you need to push it in more. Like so. So that it's definitely going to clear. And then, same as before, I use my thumb to figure out where to cut it off. Make my line. Use my wire, cut it off. And that's it. If you understand these basic concepts, then with enough practice, you should be able to make some nice looking lids.